Welcome to Audit Archive, where we run you through some of the most questionable and rather atrocious police encounters. Today, we're looking at a case where cops arrested a drunk underage student who was 7 times above the legal alcohol limit. If that sounds bad, wait till you hear about their more recent arrest. On February 26, 2021, Officer Frank Imperato of the University of Central Florida Police Department was on after midnight duty patrolling the roads when he observed a vehicle going 58 miles per hour in a posted 45 mile per hour zone. The vehicle also began drifting to the right and crossed over the solid white line into the bicycle lane, nearly hitting the sidewalk. After Officer Imperato observed this, he immediately initiated a traffic stop and made contact with the driver, who immediately said, "I drank," as soon as she rolled her windows down.
I drink.
The driver here is a 19-year-old student, Olivia Lindsay, and this wasn't the first time she crossed paths with the law. 4 months prior to this encounter, Miss Lindsay was tailgating a motorcycle and then proceeded to rear-end an SUV minutes later. After the collision, Miss Lindsay allegedly walked out of her vehicle, started yelling at the SUV driver, smacked their phone out of their hands, and also scratched their neck. Police were called, and the SUV driver wished to press charges against Miss Lindsay. She was arrested, but the charges were later dropped for unknown reasons. This incident will be later brought up by Miss Lindsay in this encounter. After Officer Imperato explained why he pulled Miss Lindsay over, he asked her how much she had to drink, and Miss Lindsay stated that she had just 1 drink that night, implying that she was definitely not too drunk to drive.
Hey, how much you had to drink tonight?
1 drink.
What were you drinking tonight?
Vodka.
Miss Lindsay went as far as to ask Officer Imperato to test her for drugs there and then, even though the topic of drugs was completely irrelevant to the encounter. She then said that she was also fine with taking a breathalyzer test right away.
Drug test me right now.
Okay, well, I'm not worried about drugs, okay?
It is to be noted that Miss Lindsay already showed most signs of being intoxicated. Her eyes were watery and bloodshot, and her speech was audibly slurred too. At this point, Officer Imperato was joined by a second responding officer who was there to aid him in the traffic stop. When Officer Imperato asked Miss Lindsay for her vehicle's registration and proof of insurance,
Okay, so let me have your vehicle registration, proof of insurance, please, okay?
she fumbled around in her car before handing them over, but continued to dig around in her purse, which inevitably raised suspicion. Amidst this, Officer Imperato noticed that she was carrying a fake ID and promptly ordered her to hand it over, to which she hesitantly pulled out a few different cards, but not the fake ID.
Okay, Olivia, let me have the fake ID. No, the one that was in your purse.
She eventually handed the fake ID over to Officer Imperato and pleaded with him not to charge her for it. Under Florida law, carrying a fake ID is a serious offense. It states that the unlawful possession of a driver's license or identification cards is a 3rd-degree felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison, 5 years of probation, and/or a $5,000 fine. And that, if it's your first offense, you could face up to 1 year in jail and a fine of up to $1,000. While pleading with Officer Imperato, Miss Lindsay referred to the arrest which occurred 4 months prior. She stated that she had already been to jail and that she doesn't want to go back.
Thank you. You've been what?
To jail and I don't belong there and I would do anything
What'd you go to jail
stay
for?
out of it.
Okay, what'd you go to jail for? I don't need your credit cards.
Following too close.
You went to jail for following too closely?
When Officer Imperato asked for more details about her past arrests, Miss Lindsay told him that she was charged with burglary of an unoccupied conveyance.
So
I went there for it and I'm really scared.
what were you charged with?
Burglary of an unoccupied conveyance when I was just using self-defense and it was dropped before it even made the state's attorney's office.
I don't need...
The term burglary of a conveyance specifically pertains to unlawful activities that occur within or in close proximity to a vehicle or means of transportation that is not owned by the individual accused of the crime. As specified in the Florida Statute 810.02, burglary of a conveyance means any of the following: entering a conveyance without permission, hiding inside a conveyance, continuing to be inside a conveyance after impression to be there has been revoked. Also, Florida law states that A basic burglary of an unoccupied structure or unoccupied conveyance is a third-degree felony that is punishable up to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. If the burglary is done during a state of emergency, the burglary can be punished as a second-degree felony. Regardless, Officer Imperato ordered Miss Lindsay to step out of her car so he could carry on with his investigation and figure out if she was under the influence or not, despite the obvious nature of it. Officer Imperato told Miss Lindsay he believed that she was not in a position to be driving and asked if she was willing to participate in a few field sobriety exercises.
I'm very concerned that you shouldn't be operating a vehicle, and I'm concerned that you're operating a vehicle in the state of Florida, in the county of Orange, in the jurisdictional limits of the University of Central Florida, while your normal faculties are impaired by a chemical or controlled substance.
Miss Lindsay agreed with no issue and also cooperated with Officer Imperato by informing him of all of her medical conditions and medications before beginning the field sobriety exercises.
Do you have any physical defects, glass eyes, artificial limbs, anything like that?
ITP.
Do you have any physical defects as far as like your neck, back, legs, and arms, knees, ankles, anything that would prevent or inhibit your completion of the exercises?
No.
No, okay, very good.
To begin, Officer Imperato started with the horizontal gaze test, which involves asking a driver to follow an object with their eyes while keeping their head still. And meanwhile, the officer looks for any involuntary eye movements, which can indicate impairment from alcohol. The body cam footage shows that Miss Lindsay failed to keep her head still and was having trouble concentrating on Officer Imperato's pen as he waved it across each time. Officer Imperato even had to ask Miss Lindsay to use her hands to hold onto her face. At this point, it was pretty clear that Miss Lindsay was heavily intoxicated, but Officer Imperato proceeded with the other two field sobriety exercises regardless. This included the walk and turn test, along with the one-leg stand test. It came as no surprise that Miss Lindsay miserably failed to pass either of these tests. After the failure in all three field sobriety exercises, Officer Imperato had no doubt left in mind if Miss Lindsay was dangerously drunk or not. Therefore, he made the swift decision to arrest Miss Lindsay for driving under the influence. Officer Imperato employed a rather interesting technique to place Miss Lindsay in handcuffs. He asked Miss Lindsay to put her arms behind her back as if she was skiing and count to 30, and was then able to conveniently place her in handcuffs.
Can you put your thumbs like this? Wiggle your thumbs? Okay, and then you're gonna put like you're skiing, put it behind your back like that. And I want you to count to 30 for me, okay?
It is to be noted that police officers often employ this technique to place drunk suspects in handcuffs. Through this approach, it becomes highly unlikely that a suspect would resist or act belligerent when realizing that they'd be going to jail. Miss Lindsay appeared to be in disbelief and once again started to plead with Officer Imperato, requesting he let her take a breath test on the spot to prove her sobriety. To this, Officer Imperato assured Miss Lindsay that she would be allowed to take a breath test at the DUI center soon after she reaches the police station.
I will do anything. I don't drink under the job. I literally, you can breathalyze me right now.
Okay, well, at the DUI center where you're gonna go to, you'll have an opportunity to take a breath test.
Officer Imperato handed Miss Lindsay over to the third respondent on the scene, Officer Quimbaggio, who was given the responsibility to transport Miss Lindsay to the police station. She patted Miss Lindsay down and secured her inside the patrol car right after. Soon after arriving at the police station, Miss Lindsay was subjected to a breath test. She blew a 0.142 into the breathalyzer machine. Under Florida statutes, section 322.2616, it is unlawful for a person under the age of 21 who has a blood alcohol or breath alcohol level of 0.02 or higher to drive or be in actual physical control of a motor vehicle. As discussed earlier, Miss Lindsay was 19 years old here, which means that she fell into this category and essentially blew a whopping 7 times above the legal limit. As a result, Miss Lindsay was charged with driving under the influence, but later agreed to a DUI diversion contract, which included 50 hours of community service, attending DUI school, taking the victim impact class, subjecting to a 10-day vehicle impound, paying $500 to a nonprofit, and $260 in fees to the department. Officer Imperato did not charge her with the fake ID. A year after this incident, in January 2023, Miss Lindsay violated her DUI diversion contract when she was found driving under the influence once again. Officers pulled her over after observing that she was driving recklessly. She also refused to partake in any field sobriety exercises this time. Miss Lindsay was placed under arrest for resisting arrest, interfering with a tow operator, and drunken disorderly. Further updates on this case are yet to be released. Be sure to check out our previous video, where we cover another outrageous police encounter